Hello everybody, my name is Jeremy Ryder. I'm a solutions architect here at Network Solutions, and today I want to talk about setting up our Meraki network. I've just got some boxes in the mail, we'll say, and I want to get them online as fast as possible and start pushing packets through them. So, as you might remember, Meraki is a cloud-based infrastructure. So I've got to get connected to the cloud here. Let's say I've already built my account, my dashboard is all set up, it's ready to go. Maybe I've even pushed some configurations in there initially. What's the first thing I want to consider when I talk about putting my Meraki network together? Well, number one, before we go very far at all, I just want to talk about, let's emphasize best practices. So just because it's a different management system, just because we interact with Meraki a little bit different than we have before, I still want to build my network out with a core layer, with some distribution layer, depending on the size of your network. Maybe these are merged together. But this is meant to be highly resilient, highly available. All of my routing and ACL and functionality is built in my core and distribution layer. And then I start bringing in my access layer switches down here. Maybe that's a single switch, maybe it's a stack of switches. But let's still follow best practices. Whether it's Meraki switches or traditional Cisco switches, this is the topology that we want to build out. So once we've got our topology built out, constructed the way we want, now it's about harnessing the power of Meraki. So we have our access layer switches, and I'm going to focus there because from the dashboard, we have the ability to, en masse, push out configurations and duplicate these at scale. So the access layer tends to have the same VLANs, the same management parameters, the same maybe MTU size across the board. And so but we've got 24, 48 ports to set up all at once. If we can configure a bunch of access switches, that's where the Meraki dashboard really begins to shine. So let's talk about plug and play. Now you might hear it referred to as zero-touch provisioning, just the idea that I don't have really configuration to do on this switch prior to putting it in the rack, powering it on, and applying and plugging it in with an uplink. I can just go out there, plug the switch in. It's going to call back to the Meraki service in the cloud, and we'll be up and running. That's the idea. But there are a couple of requirements that go with that. So, requirement number one, when I've got this uplink, the cable that I'm connecting the switch into, it's got to go to a VLAN that has DHCP. It's got to be a VLAN that provides me, as part of that DHCP, some DNS services. And once I have those two things, then the switch itself is going to connect or test internet connectivity. So this uplink port becomes critical that, most access ports that I plug into, most networks that I connect to are going to have these three things. But if you've locked any of these down, make sure that the uplink port, you provide that connectivity to. And if your firewall is doing any filtering, specifically we want to use UDP port 7351, which will allow us to get out to the Meraki service. So that's plug and play in a nutshell. The other thing that I want to look for is, let's talk about the uplink port. So all ports, I'll say by default, on Meraki switches are configured as a trunk, and that's operating 802.1q encapsulation protocol. So there's some antiquated ones out there still. Make sure it's 802.1q. And then the native VLAN, and this is important again for making sure I have my DHCP, my DNS, and my internet connectivity functions. The native VLAN is VLAN 1. So if you've got an existing infrastructure that we're connecting to, or it's an upstream port, I need this native VLAN 1 to, again, have this DHCP, DNS, and internet connectivity. So once I have that, I'm in good shape. I've got connectivity. Now the second part of plug and play is the switch is going to start going through some processes. First, I want to upgrade the software. So one of the beauties of the Meraki solution is that all your software is going to be standardized across your environment. You can set that in the dashboard. So when this switch comes online, no matter what software it's shipped from the warehouse with, as soon as it connects, it's going to go through a process of upgrading its software. Now, a lot of times that can take about 10 minutes, and there's like a 60-second reboot in there. Once I've got my software up and running, then I do a configuration upgrade. So I've already established that this switch is in the dashboard. I can start to pre-program it before I've even plugged it in. That configuration needs to come down from the Meraki dashboard once it sees that switch actually come online. So I've got connectivity, I've got my software upgraded, and I've got my configuration loaded. At this point, I'm online. All right. Now those are the basics of configuration. That get me online, but now I'm going to go into phase 3, which is actual configuration of the switch. Let's look at this switch for a minute. Got all my ports. Boop, boop, boop. Now out of the box, what did I say? The defaults are that all these ports are trunks with native VLAN 1. And you know what? That works. I can plug all of my endpoints in if I want all my endpoints to be in VLAN 1, and they'll get connected across VLAN 1. But one of the downsides to leaving all of these ports as trunks, even though we could, is that we don't have port fast enabled. Now, if you're familiar with port fast, you know we're running spanning tree technology to try and prevent loops in the network. And this is a way. Normally, we'd have to wait 30-some seconds for a port to come online to go through the spanning tree processes of listening and learning and make sure that there's no loop in place. If we start with port fast, though, that port automatically comes online. And for anybody that's connected into a network before, right, I want to see that link light show up immediately. So let's configure these as access ports. We'll call them edge ports as well, right? Anywhere you're actually plugging in a PC or a printer or any other kind of device that you might have. We'll just say IoT, anything over here. Those will actually be access ports. Now, if you've got another switch or you've got an access point, those I can leave as trunk ports, and we'll allow them to negotiate what spanning tree process they're going to or mode they're going to be in. But for all of your edge points, let's go ahead and reconfigure those as access points. The other thing I want to do when I set these up is apply tags, right? So I'm talking about, is this a desktop? Is it a phone? Tags are powerful in the Meraki dashboard because they allow me to search, I can have 10,000 ports. But using kind of a Google-ish search prompt, I can look for all my ports that are tagged phone or all my ports that are tagged desktop and quickly make a policy change, a configuration change across all those ports with just several clicks of the button. So when you're installing your switch, do yourself a favor and actually apply tags to each of those ports so you know kind of in general what they're doing. once we've taken a look at each of the ports, now we can just kind of get into switch configuration. So here we're going to look at spanning tree. By default we run RSTP, it's a little bit faster. And you want to set up things, especially if it's your core switch, the root preference. We can do some other things. We can set up QoS rules. We can set up ACLs. So if you just want to block traffic from one network to the next, Meraki switches actually allow you to do that. Even if it's just a layer 2 switch, they've got layers down to layer 7 visibility. So they'll apply ACLs as needed. And then of course, if we've got any routing or maybe some DHCP forwarding to do, we'll set that up as well. So remember, turn your trunks into access ports and apply these tags, and then you'll have an operational network. Thanks. All right, and then finally today, let's just talk about configuration. Now for the most part, Meraki is plug and play. You can turn that switch on, connect it to your network, as long as you've got DHCP, DNS, and internet connectivity set up for that port, you'll be in good shape. But a couple things I like to change once I bring a switch online. The first thing I just want to say is all of our ports are set up as trunks. So I've got my switch over here. I got all these ports. I could use trunk ports to connect maybe to another switch, but mostly I've got other PCs. Maybe I've got some phones. Maybe I've got some access points. I don't want the majority of these ports to actually be trunk ports. Let's turn them into access ports. The other advantage we get of turning them into access ports is that all these switches run spanning tree. And sometimes it takes spanning tree a little while to negotiate. So when I plug that port in, I want it to come up right away, and that's the technology called port fast. As soon as I enable this port as an access port, port fast comes on by default as well. So somebody comes to the wall jack, plugs in, it goes back to the Meraki switch, and the link light comes on and we're up and running. Something people have gotten used to. So we want to shift those ports to access. The other thing I like to do is tags. Tags are important in the Meraki dashboard world. Why? Because they allow us to just do bulk configuration. So if the port plugs into a phone, tag it as a phone. If the port plugs into your printer, tag it as a printer. If the port plugs into a desktop or an HVAC machine or any other IoT device or whatever we have, tag it with what it is. And that's going to allow you, when you've got 10,000 ports in your system, maybe across multiple buildings on a campus, I can go in and just search for, I need all of the phone ports. And rather than looking at all 10,000 ports and trying to select which one I want, it's just going to filter it down for me. Well, here's your 300 phone ports. And I can quickly apply a change. I can quickly apply a policy. Whatever I need to do, these tags make bulk configuration, easily managing your environment, much simpler within the Meraki dashboard. So make sure you add those tags in as you go through the install. Well, now that we've got ports set up, there's just some other switch-based configuration items I guess I'll highlight here real quick. If you're running spanning tree, it's best to actually define the root of the system. So if I've got a hierarchy of switches here, spanning tree kind of wisdom, I guess, says make this core switch the root. And the rest of the topology will fall in line. So that's under switch configuration. I can set some QoS policies. So if I want to handle especially voice traffic, respect one of the DSCP tags, we'll say it's EF, generally is. We can set that up within switch configuration so that they reply to that. ACLs, I can do security, access control through building ACLs in the switch configuration. And then lastly, if it's a switch that supports routing, some of the MS250, MS350, 425, etc. I can configure any of the routing options in DHCP within that space as well. So big takeaway, once you get to the configuration process of your deployment, is go ahead and look for these access ports and get them migrated over from trunk ports and apply some tags. It's going to make your life a lot easier going forward. Thanks a lot.